perpetual snows in the Himalayas, North European weather in Kashmir, tropical heat in the southern tip, hot desert in Rajasthan, a 2,000-mile long coastline, basalt ridges in the peninsula, dense tropical forests in laterite soil along the western scarp, the great Gangetic river system in a wide and fertile alluvial basin, and swamps of Kutch and Orissa. All this completes the picture of our subcontinent. To a careful observer, India offers a remarkable mosaic of ecological patterns and resources. Cultural differences, too, are as wide as the geographical diversity prevalent in the country. These cultures have exploited the ecology in their own different ways. A study of all these changes is what we term as the ecological history of India. There was a long period in human history where the mainstay of subsistence was collection of vegetable matter and hunting. Small communities existed as nomadic bands and tribal groups. Humans were merely a part of a community existing along with the elements of the environment. Such societies were characterized by nature worship and supported by specific social restraints and practices towards the prudent use of nature. Extensive areas where hunter-gatherers and shifting cultivator societies persisted included the humid forests in the northeast of the Brahmaputra Valley and some parts of central India. Agricultural pastoral people were spread over India in several periods and phases. With the discovery of iron and development of metal tools, they were able to penetrate the dense forests of the Indo-Gangetic plains. The habitats that most suited to such modes of resource utilization consisted of the drier tracts of northwestern India, the Indus Plains, and the Deccan Peninsula. These are areas where animal husbandry and nomadic cattle herding combined with shifting cultivation during the period 6000 to 1000 BC.
I think if you are talking of a time span between 6000 years before Christ and 1000 years before Christ, I think the impact was slow, gradual and marginal. Obviously the Stone Age man was not burning forests or devastating them on a very, very large scale. The process became a little faster when people moved into the forest and cleared forests for agriculture. But I think the scale then, the pressure of population on the land was not so great as if to sort of make the ecology groan under its pressure.
The first urban civilization of the Indian subcontinent was spread over a wide region of the northwest of India. The reason for the spread along the river Indus is linked to the necessity of water and food. Agriculture became possible in the alluvial desert without the clearing of heavy forest. Fire and stone tools would suffice. The harrow was widely used with the wooden plough. Flood irrigation was used for the construction of dams to increase the area under silting. The agrarian surplus generated remained steady and allowed the establishment of urban centers. In due course, rivers shifted their routes on account of geological changes associated with the rising of the Himalayan mountain ranges. The system of irrigation fell into disrepair, and that spelt the end of the Indus Valley civilization.
The scholars are not really unanimous about what caused the end of the civilization. Maybe it was the river changing course, maybe it was an earthquake, maybe it was a devastating flood. And then when the Aryans came and they moved steadily from west to east, they obviously cleared the forest. And this process was slow. So I don't think that it disturbed the ecology. It must have had an impact on the ecology, but it definitely did not have a traumatic impact on ecology.
The forest, which was the resource base of food gatherers, was now destroyed in order to free land for agriculture and animal husbandry. The belief system of food gatherers, which attributed supernatural powers to trees, groves, streams, ponds, rocks, etc., was replaced with more abstract forces of nature, which are earth, fire, water, wind, and sky. Now the colonizers invoked assistance from these forces in order to destroy the forests. The main ritual became the worship of fire, the yajna, a ritual that necessitated the use of large amounts of wood and animal fat. The burning of the Khandava forest aptly illustrates this belief system. A new belief system echoing the need for conservation appealed more strongly to the agricultural pastoral sections of the population. The votaries of the Yajna system, the Brahmins, opposed it. The rise of Buddhism and Jainism can be explained in these terms. Both religions stood against the hegemony of the Brahmin and the wasteful burning of large amounts of clarified butter, wood, and also slaughter of animals in sacrificial rituals. As the availability of resources for colonization reduced, Buddhism and Jainism advocated conservation and judicious resource management. Buddhism was the most social of all religions. It harked back to food gathering, as the great teacher himself was an expert food gatherer. So were the early monks. They were forbidden to labor for profit and agriculture.
Buddhism and Jainism were not so much a response to my mind as to ecological threat which mankind on the subcontinent faced, but because of expensive ritual which the Brahmins had imposed on the rest of the people, because of the stratification of society in caste system, because of the rigidity of the caste system, and obviously there was some resentment against violence against animals, large-scale slaughter for the yajnas and so on.
But the creed that was to survive into modern times in India was not Buddhism, but the community worshipping Lord Krishna. Krishna belonged to the Yadus, one of the 5 main Aryan peoples. He protected the cattle of the Yadu against Indra and never invoked a fire sacrifice where animals were offered up. Here the pastoral life was giving way to the agrarian. In the constant competition for control over resources between food gatherers and food producers, the latter most certainly won and grew in terms of numbers and area. The ruling classes subsumed the food gatherers among their own structures and kept them at the lowest position and assigned them the lowliest of tasks. This process of assimilation carried on.
If we look from the historical perspective, in earlier time, say historical time, there has been a good balance between man and environment. And if in some situation it was not so, it did not affect the man or the environment as to that degree that it could affect or cause pollution. For example, the density of population was very low, the pollution in water was very low. So even if at some point or some places there was some kind of pollution, it was automatically taken care of by the natural processes. But today it is not possible because we are using the resources to a great extent and more than what is required.
Brahmins played an important role in the expansion of cultivation eastwards. They began to advance into the dense forest in small bands with their own cattle. Their harmlessness was obvious, and they easily mingled with the food-gathering tribals living in the forests. They carried out the earliest probes in the process of extension of boundaries of cultivated area and chiefdoms. The period between 500 BC and 300 AD was characterized by trade and empire building through warfare. These activities are well illustrated in Kautilya's Arthashastra. The conquest of Kalinga by Ashoka can be understood in this light. This was symptomatic of the continuing struggle between food producers and food gatherers. The Mauryan state carried out this process in an organized manner. The state now laid claim to control over non-cultivated areas also. This involved de-recognizing the rights of food-gathering tribes and peasant communities. State intervention into patterns of local autonomy led to considerable seizure of agricultural surplus and had profound impacts upon resource use. Ashoka, following his conversion to Buddhism, undertook the best-known state-sponsored conservation effort. One of his post-Kalinga edicts states that medical attention should be made available to both man and animal. The medicinal herbs, fruit trees, the roots and tubers are to be transplanted in those places where they are not presently available. Wells should be dug and shadowy trees should be planted by the roadside for enjoyment by both man and animal. The Gupta, the post-Gupta and the pre-Muslim period in Indian history from the 4th to the 10th centuries was a period of low urbanization, low trade and many small kingdoms. A qualitative change could have been brought about in this situation by climatic change or change in technology. There is no definite evidence of climatic change. However, there is evidence of technological change and great improvements in mode of transport and communications.
I think it's quite right to say that things did change in the medieval period, not only with the Mughal Empire, they changed with even the Sultanate period, where large-scale constructions took place. There was construction of forts, fortifications, new cities came up as chawnis or as cantonments. Armies moved, there were decades-long campaigns in Deccan and elsewhere, and there was sacking of the crops, there was uprooting of the people, there was large-scale misery. There was also a different kind of a more oppressive rule which came up, which was not maybe so responsive to the peasants, and maybe the people, whatever surplus they produced was appropriated by the courtiers and the noblemen who had a wasteful, debauched lifestyle. But again, I would feel that the impact on environment was not so great.
In Mughal India, the state claimed only the surplus from a grain production. The peasants could not be dispossessed of their lands, and the state had no direct claims over lands except hunting preserves. All over Mughal India, the control and management of local resources did vest in local communities who practiced ways to ensure conservation. The demand for timber by the state was not very great. There's the memorable story of a sect founded in Rajasthan about 500 years ago that gave absolute protection to the khejuri tree, a multi-purpose leguminous tree of great utility to the community. About 350 years ago, the Prince of Jodhpur needed fuel for his lime kilns, and for this an attempt was made to fell a grove of khejuri trees in a nearby village. Many Bishnois laid down their lives to protect the trees. Such methods of resource conservation, couched in religious terms, have constantly been arising in Indian history and are not merely leftovers of a food-gathering phase. Pre-colonial system was characterized by grave iniquities, and the cornerstone of all this was the caste system. India's links with Christian Europe were to be qualitatively different. In the 16th century, Europe was on the verge of industrial revolution. Wood, earlier used for shelter and fuel, could now be consumed as paper and fuel for long-distance transport users with limitless demands. India became the source of supply of shipbuilding timber that was becoming scarce in England. The emphasis was on agrarian expansion, and this involved destruction of forests. This process received tremendous fillings with railway construction in the mid-19th century. Trees were cut for railway sleepers and fuel for operation of the railways. Railway requirements were the most significant force in the thinning of the Indian forests. Sal, teak and deodar forests were brought under the axe. However, many believe that the impact was lesser than what it is today. In British times, the revenue requirements of the state necessitated investments in water-intensive agriculture as well. This was in order to increase agricultural production and thereby the surplus. The construction of the Kosi barrage was just such an attempt to harness the mighty Kosi without adequate attention to the human and environmental costs. The results of such misadventures are annual floods, unproductive land, unemployment, and massive migration from Bihar to places like Delhi and Punjab. Forest legislation in the 19th century provided the prototype for an annexationist colonial attitude towards natural resources in India. New laws destroyed all customary rights of communities. The two world wars put extreme stress on Indian forests to meet the exigencies of the war situation. From 1878 up to 1947, colonial forest policy showed remarkable continuity. A major transformation in land use was the advent of plantation crops such as tea, coffee and rubber. Forest land was sold to European planters at very low prices. Along with the denial of rights to local communities dependent on the forest, the plantations brought about intensification of forest destruction as they demanded timber for packaging and wood fuel. The colonial administrators viewed shifting cultivation or jhum as a destructive approach to the forests. Often they were at loggerheads with jhum cultivators as it was carried out in areas which were suited for commercially valuable trees. Settled cultivators too were affected by state rules pertaining to grazing rights and rights to free fuel and timber. Independent India, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, saw a hasty effort to catch up with the West through rapid urbanization and industrialization. The Bombay Plan of 1944 visualized a strong and centralized state. The choice was to industrialize, and the underlying strategy was to use resources intensively.
I'm not very satisfied with the present scenario. It is politically correct to make right noises about green politics, ecological sensitivity and so on. At the same set of Indians gets excited about a grandiose plan, quixotic like the river linking plan. I mean, I think despite great protest and against substantial scientific evidence, the Tehri Dam continues to be built. the Narmada Dam did submerge and uproot and dislocated a lot of people. People have forgotten about the Silent Valley project, but I suppose a reasonable chunk of pristine forest there in Kerala has been disturbed. And this keeps happening. This keeps happening, and we don't worry about the social costs, we don't worry about the economic costs, and we don't worry about the ecological cost of so-called grand national, very ambitious programs.
The role of the forest departments in the post-colonial period matched closely that of the colonial forest administration. The stress continued to be on revenue-earning commercial species which denied the rights of forest-dependent communities. This has led to movements by rural communities to re-establish the rights to manage and preserve their resource base.
Well, the government of India has become very sensitive in last few decades about the man-environment relationship, man-forest relationship, and they are actively engaged in different programs. However, they are immensely helped by the NGOs who are bringing forth the issues, challenges, difficulties and the lacunas which is always keeping the government on toes. So they are complementing each other to see that the man-forest relationship is maintained.
The Sardar Sarovar project has become the symbol of all those struggling to prevent the sacrifice of the habitat of millions of tribal and peasant communities. Rehabilitation and resettlement have received inadequate attention in such mega projects, leading to the growth of such ecological refugees.
There are NGOs which are very active in advocacy. It is very fashionable to say that we are all very green, but how many people, despite the ban in the capital, have stopped using polythene? How many people don't discard polythene on the roadside where it can't be recycled? How many of us are worried about pollution unless it is legally imposed on us, like the CNG instance in India? How many of us are worried about particulate matter in our atmosphere? How many of us are worried about arsenic poisoning underground water in Kerala or West Bengal? How many of us are worried about Pepsi and Coca-Cola not being socially responsible about their waste disposal?
The ecological history of India is a story of prudence and profligacy, of sustainable and exhaustive resource use. In our own times, acute resource shortages have given rise to social conflicts, and these have significant consequences that reflect in the life of the people and the health of their land.